Hi, this is ZOIA, a modular synth and effects pedal with over 80 modules and 20 built-in effects. And while it is very much its own thing, in order to understand what it can do, it needs to be compared to 3 different product types, as it may be compelling to 3 different types of people or 3 different needs. The first is people who don't want to program anything, but like to explore unique and boutique effects pedals like shallow water, mood, and many others, pedals that go way beyond the classic distortion, delay, reverb pedal categories. A second category of person that might be interested in ZOIA is someone who's looking for a portable multi-effect with lots of customization, and might also consider multi-effects like the Boss GT series, Zoom G series, Line 6 pods, and so on. Then there's a third completely different class of people who are into creating their own synths and effects out of modular components, oscillators, LFOs, filters, and so on, whether that's in hardware Eurorack format, VCV Rack, or software platforms like Reactor or Pure Data. Before I jump into comparisons, let's take a look at the hardware overall. ZOIA's enclosure is solid metal. It has 3 stomp switches which can be used in 2 modes. In the default mode, their function is as per their label. So to either bypass the patch and then scroll between different patches and select a new one. If you don't press scroll, the select button can be used to control different parameters in a patch. And if you hold both these buttons together, this lights up, and then these 2 stomp switches can also be used to control different parameters in a patch if they're configured to do so. ZOIA can store 64 patches at any given time on board. You've got this selector encoder, which is clickable, which also lets you select patches and configure various parameters. So if you hit a parameter, you can change its value using this encoder. This is a back key. This shift key lets you activate these functions that have these icons here on top and on the bottom. A patch might have multiple pages, in which case you can use these buttons to page through them. There's an 8x5 grid of non-velocity sensitive pads. Don't be intimidated by the colors, by the way. You can customize these any way you like. Each pad represents a module if it's lit up, and several pads can represent a bigger module. It does look a little bit intimidating to begin with, but you get used to it pretty easily. I'll show you how to build patches later on. The pads can also be used as literally keys in a keyboard. On the back are 2 1/4-inch stereo inputs, 2 1/4-inch stereo outputs, MIDI in and out with an 1/8 inch or 3.5mm TRSA standard MIDI jacks, and it comes with 2 of these MIDI adapters, so you can connect it to regular 5-pin MIDI. ZOIA also has an expression pedal input which can be used as control voltage in and out with a TRS splitter cable. On the back also is an SD card slot. ZOIA can store 64 patches on board, and you don't need the SD card to run them. Rather, you use the SD card to load patches into ZOIA and back up patches onto the card. ZOIA lets you do bulk saves and loads using whole folders, so you can swap entire batches of 64 presets quite easily. Finally, on the hardware side, ZOIA's screen is very clear from practically any angle, but it's also quite small, and as a matter of fact, ZOIA itself is quite small, only a smidge bigger than what can be considered regular guitar pedals, and if you're familiar with Volcas, here's one for size. You can see it's actually quite smaller than this too. Okay, let's see how ZOIA fares in the boutique effects category. It comes with a few interesting presets, and there are quite a few more online. I'll be using this synth sound to test the pedal, as well as this guitar sample. So this is the dry sound, and this, for example, is Chinook, which sounds like distortion, but then ends with that. Then there are a few others. Let's say this one's both colorful and interesting. And then we saw this guy before. This will both impact audio and can be its own synth. Right? So effects can not only process incoming audio, be their own synth. And again, this can really go as crazy as the developer of the pedal wanted, right? So again, a relatively simple type of effect that can also do things like this while it's processing audio. Now, this is an Empress effect pedal, so you can expect even the usual effects to sound quite nice. So those are some of the bundled presets, but the real potential, I think, are the effects created by the community of ZOIA users. Now, there are dozens of these available on patch storage and more being added every week. Let me just show you a couple of them. So again, this is my synth sound, and if we de-bypass this, this one is called Johann Looper, and it has this series of cascading loops. And it is cool as well, right? So then somebody went out and recreated Shallow Water from Fairfield Circuitry. So this is a really nice effect. This is the dry signal, and if I turn it on, it makes these really nice random pitch bends, pitch breaks in the sound, which is quite cool, I think. So these are just a few, and Empress Effects, the company that makes ZOIA, is doing something really smart, I think, which is sponsoring competitions for the best patch, which is triggering patch development even further. So let's talk about the pros and cons for this section of the video, which is looking at ZOIA as a boutique effects pedal for people who don't want to program anything. On the pros side, it indeed seems like ZOIA is shaping up to be potentially the ultimate boutique mega effects pedal that will just grow and grow with content over time if what's going on in patchstorage.com is any indication of the future. But on the other hand, standalone boutique pedals and even regular guitar pedals have the knob per function advantage over ZOIA. ZOIA really only has one knob, so to edit a parameter in a particular patch, you need to first press that parameter and then edit its value with the knob. Also, the knob is an endless encoder configured in a way that slow movements lead to small incremental changes, and the changes are bigger the faster you turn the encoder. So while this system is really good for dialing in numbers to the precision of 0.1%, for a performance, I would rather have just a regular knob or fader like in other pedals. Now luckily you can map an external MIDI controller to parameters on ZOIA, though currently you need to redo this for every patch. So for example, in this patch, these are the 6 core parameters that I want to control with an external controller. To access them from a MIDI controller, I first need to star them if they aren't already starred. And that entails clicking the parameter and holding Shift and star. So now it's highlighted. I'll do this quickly for all 6 parameters. Once they're starred, they will appear in the starred parameters list. Right? That's this thing here. And by the way, for the purposes of this video, ignore all the Eurorack patching stuff over here. For all intents and purposes, just treat this as a regular MIDI controller. I just like it because it's small and fits well in the frame. Anyway, to map a parameter in the starred parameters list, you need to hit Shift Star again, select it, go to Learn mode, and then move the fader that you want to control it. I'll just repeat this process very quickly. So now I have my 6 key parameters mapped, and you'll notice that as I move the faders on the controller, the value also changes here in the preset. So now I have control over this preset and its parameters from a MIDI controller. Anyway, all that was both to show you how to MIDI map and to say that if you're a knob per function kind of person, this pedal is BYOK, or bring your own knobs. The second thing you need to be aware of if you want to use multiple different boutique pedal style effects on ZOIA or any other kind of effect is that currently when you load up a patch, there's no way to know what it actually does other than its name. You need to refer to the patch description online or start pressing modules on the grid or stomp switches to experiment with what they do and gradually feel your way around the patch. A lot of patches just don't have descriptions for what the parameters do, and I'm not saying anything bad about the person that made this patch because it's awesome. I'm just saying this is an overall issue. Now, I mentioned this to Empress Effects, and they're aware that it is an issue and are working on ideas along with feedback from the community on how to solve this. Empress seemed to be open to adding a custom patch description feature so that open text can be added to a patch, and hopefully this is something we'll see in the near future. Even when and if those features are available, it's really up to the community of patch designers to actually type those button names and patch descriptions in. Hopefully that will happen too. So, dear patchmaker community, please take a couple extra minutes to star and name your key parameters. Finally, when comparing ZOIA to any hypothetical boutique or other pedal, it should be noted that while ZOIA is extremely programmable, it may obviously have limitations that a dedicated pedal may not, like processing power or chips that do specific things, dedicated analog components, and other limitations. For example, ZOIA's looper is currently limited to 12 seconds, though I know they're working on expanding that too. Okay, let's move on to the next category that ZOIA can fit into, and that's the multi-effects category, meaning single boxes that are designed to save you the need to buy some or all of a pedal board with dedicated separate effects. So the answer is that ZOIA can be a multi-effects pedal. The only issue is you need to sort of step into programming a little bit. Let me show you how to do that, and you can judge for yourself whether it's easy or not. So this is a blank patch. The thing you need to have in every patch is something that represents the outputs and the inputs. You add that module very easily, you press an empty slot, look for interface modules, which are the modules that interface you with external gear, select audio input, and done. We now have LEDs and pads that represent the audio input. If I play into ZOIA, you'll see these become brighter. We're not hearing anything because we haven't connected the inputs to the outputs. So for that, I'll just add an output interface module into these two pads. So we've got left-right input, left-right output. The only thing we need to do is hook up a cable to connect them. You do that by pressing the two pads. Boom, we have a cable. We can set gain if we want, and the right pads, another cable. So we can now hear our audio through. Now to create an effects chain, all we need to do is load up the different effects. So for that, I'll hit up an empty slot, go to the effects modules, and then choose the effect I want to use. Let's take fuzz for the heck of it, right? I can change its color if I wanted. Colors don't really matter that much. And click done. So I've loaded a fuzz effect, but it's not in the signal chain yet. Right now, the left input is connected to the left output, and the right input is connected to the right output. I'll delete these connections by selecting them and then hitting delete, selecting and hitting delete. And for simplicity's sake, I'll just connect the left into here, and then if I connect the output into here, I should be hearing the fuzz. Right? But only in my left ear. I can change the fuzz parameters, by the way, by selecting them, right? And editing them. Let's add another effect in the chain. I'll disconnect this from the output, go into here, which is an empty slot, go to my effects modules. Let's look for, let's say, you can see there are quite a few here. Let's choose a ping pong delay. I'm fine with 1 in and 2 outs. Choose this, hook the fuzz into the input of the pedal, and then take the stereo outputs and connect them so that we can all hear them. And now we have fuzz and delay. And again, I can go in and change the different delay parameters. So for example, delay time. Right? Or feedback. If I wanted to, like I did before, I could always star these parameters right? And then go to the start parameter list and control them with an external controller. Okay, so that's how you set up multiple effects chains, and I guess you can compare that to any multi-effects pedals you have experience with. Obviously, most multi-effects pedals are designed just for that, meaning they'll have an interface designed for making effects chains, some easier to understand than others. They might be either knob per function or have multiple knobs for each pedal effect slot, but overall from the multi-effects pedals that I've seen, they take about as many key presses as ZOIA takes to set up a chain the way you want it. ZOIA has a nice variety of effects. I'll just scroll through them quickly. You saw them before. Tone control, sort of like EQ, various delays, overdrive, distortion, compressor, gate, a few reverbs, which sound awesome, reverb light, which takes less CPU power, phaser, chorus, vibrato, and even a few cabinet simulation options. You can take a look at those here. Aside from these, there are also audio modules that are really effects as well, like a filter, a simple delay line, audio panner, pitch shifter for audio, and a few more including a looper and granular engine. On the pros side for ZOIA though, compared to other multi-effects, is what you can do with ZOIA's effects if you're willing to dive a little bit deeper into patching, and that's where ZOIA blows other multi-effects pedals out the water with modulation, synth engines, sequencers, and more, which brings us to the third category of product it's worth comparing ZOIA to, and that's modular patching environments, anywhere from hardware Eurorack to software environments like VCV Rack, Reactor, and Pure Data. Now, all these modular environments are similar in that you have individual modules that have certain functions, inputs, and outputs, and you connect them to each other to build your custom synth or effect or both. Now, ZOIA at its heart is a full-blown modular system. It has dozens of module types. We went through some of them before, but if you're familiar with modular environments I spoke of, you'll feel very much at home with ZOIA. So on the audio module side, things you're used to seeing from synths, like an oscillator, VCA, and so on. And then on the control modules, again, a bunch of modules, LFO, sequencer, envelopes, sample and hold, whole bunch of things you're probably used to seeing on Eurorack or VCV Rack or other modular type systems. These are bunched up in groups, like I mentioned before. Interface modules let you connect with the outside world using CV, MIDI, the buttons on board, and so on. Audio modules will take audio in and process it or generate audio or do both. Control modules are for modulating things, so they'll either take in or generate CV, or basically change parameters. Analysis modules will take in audio and generate outgoing modulation or CV, and the effects are sort of these mega audio effects we saw before. Now, obviously, there are big differences between something like this as a patching environment and Eurorack hardware or software. Aside from the obvious, one limitation of ZOIA patching compared to most modular environments is that control voltage and audio can't be patched into each other. So, for example, the VCA here is used for audio, and there's another component you need to use for attenuating a control signal with voltage. You also can't, for example, patch the output of a filter as a control signal to modulate another parameter. So the big question is, what's it like to create a patch here compared to a bigger, more expansive environment? Let's create a simple patch and find out. So as before, I still want my interface modules, right? Audio in and audio out. Now the module I want to create is a controllable stereo filter. So for that, I'll go into my audio modules and first grab a filter. State variable filter is good enough for me. And I actually want two of those because we want to be working in stereo. So again, audio modules, state variable filter, done. And let's put some patch cables. So input left to one filter, input right to the other filter, and then filter out to my output and filter out to my other output. So one filter going to the left, one filter going to the right, one filter coming from the left and another coming from the right. Now I can control these filters manually, right? On the left and on the right. But I don't want to do that because I want them to move together for that cool stereo filter effect. So for that, I need to add a value module, which is a control module. Let's just find that guy here, right? I'll have one for the filter cutoff and another for filter resonance. So let's do that. Let's hook this to control both filter cutoffs, and hook this to control both resonances. So now, if I select this parameter and control it, right, it will open up both filters. If I want to use a controller to control this, I can of course go into here, star it, go into the starred parameters, and then hit MIDI learn, whoops, and wiggle this guy. Right, so now I'm controlling the filter, or both filters, with this fader. Let's do the same for resonance. Star it, go into starred parameters, hit this, right, or actually here, MIDI learn, fantastic. All right, so now I've got both resonance and filter cutoff control for both my filters, and if you're hearing this in stereo, it's pretty cool. Now, what is modular patching without modulation? Let's add an LFO, right? So that's a control module, and it's right up here. And let's go for a sine wave LFO. Here we go. And done. So you can see the modulation action happening here. And the last cool thing I wanted to show you about ZOIA patching is that once you make a connection, and let's say I want to connect this LFO to the filter cutoff frequency, right, you can determine the modulation depth in the connection itself. So right now, if I hit this, it's going to sound pretty crazy. But if I wanted to tone it down, right, I just lower the connection strength. I can always change the offset with this. By the way, another cool thing is that there's this sort of mini scope here. If you press Shift and this I, you can see what's happening to an individual parameter on this little mini scope. So that is how you create modular patches in ZOIA. Again, once you get over the learning hump, it's not that bad. Anyway, how does this compare? Well, obviously I have to be very general here. If you enjoy hooking up modules to each other, you'll feel right at home, but the bigger your patches get, the harder it is to remember what's going on, not to mention decipher other people's patches. Patches can spread out across multiple pages, right? We saw that before. So you can create quite big patch monstrosities very easily, but getting back to a patch after you made it is not an easy task, like I said, not to mention analyzing someone else's patch. So compared to a bigger software or hardware system, it's a little bit harder to figure out what's going on. Empress have said they're not planning on creating a software editor for ZOIA, but that they might open up some sort of API for third parties to make one. It's not clear currently how easy that would be to make happen even if an API was available, so don't count on it, but it might be a pleasant surprise in the future. There are obviously many more differences between this and a full-blown modular system. I guess one that's on many people's minds is sample playback. While you can record audio in real time and play it back in a patch, ZOIA currently doesn't support storing patches with samples built in, so you can't play back audio from a bank of samples built in or saved into a patch. Another limitation inherent to a system running on a built-in computer is CPU power. As you add modules, you'll notice an on-screen CPU meter showing you how much you've used out of the total available processing power. So you can see in my stereo filter patch, I only used 15%, so there's quite a bit more to go. And if you hit Shift and Settings, you can actually see, let me just find this guy, DSP usage on a per module basis, which is pretty sweet. On the pro side, while other modular systems have their advantages, ZOIA is a standalone modular patching environment with dozens of Eurorack-style modules where you can both create patches right on the hardware and step on it without having it break. So to have that kind of power and flexibility in your effects board is quite an unparalleled achievement. So let's step back and look at ZOIA overall. It seems like on the software side, Empress Effects isn't resting on its laurels. I mentioned some of my wishlist features before, but frankly what matters is the features the community wants, and there's an online voting forum for users. It's pretty clear Empress Effects are listening and will make what's possible happen. On the hardware side, the only thing I would have loved to see to make this perfect is a few patch parameter control knobs on board. So if you feel the same way, plan on getting a companion MIDI controller. Also, as of the making of this video, there are still a few bugs here and there. Hopefully Empress will address those quickly. So if you look at the three product categories I mentioned before, boutique effects, multi-effects, and modular systems, if you're just into standard multi-effects chains and don't plan to do any tweaking of your own, there are probably more cost-effective solutions out there with better hardware controls. But if you're into pedals that can do unique, special, and quirky things, and there's a growing collection of those things online, and especially if you are interested in creating a dream pedal of your own, ZOIA is the best game in town. And if you're thinking of getting into patching, you'll definitely want to check out my book, which has over 100 patching ideas, tips, and tricks available to people who support this channel on Patreon. Feel free to ask me any questions below, hit like if this was useful, and ring the bell after you hit subscribe if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.